Thank you, and thank you for that lovely introduction. So let me just get my presentation up. So I'm here to talk to you today about the history of the IWM Film Archive. It's the oldest film archive in the UK and one of the oldest in the world. And I thought I'd spend some time talking about its strategies around collecting, preservation and access. So to begin with, to understand the history of the film archive, you have to understand the history of the Imperial War Museum as a whole. So the museum was founded on the 5th of March 1917, and although the First World War would continue to rage for another year, it was decided at the time that Britain needed to have a national memorial which would explore both the military and civilian experience of the First World War across all sections of society. When the Second World War started in 1939, and then with the Korean War in 1953, the museum's remit expanded to encompass any conflicts which involved British and its then Commonwealth troops, which means we have this incredibly unique collection of documents, sound recordings, films, photos, uniforms, objects, big and small, from across the 20th and 21st century. The museum's been collecting films since its inception in 1917, and at the last count, which was a number of years ago now, we've got approximately 25,000 hours worth of material held over multiple different film formats. We've divided the collection up into 4 main time periods, which I'll run you through quickly over the next few slides. And then within those big kind of time periods, we have smaller sub-collections within them. So I thought I'd start off with our 2 biggest and most well-known collections, which are our First World War films, which range from sort of 1914 to 1918, and our Second World War film collection, which mainly runs from 1939 to 1945. As you can see, there are lots of similarities across the collections, which I've kind of broken down into 3 main parts for you. I mean, I could spend an hour just talking about the history of these collections alone, but really briefly, we can divide these collections up into 3 main sections. So the films that were taken for the British government, the official films as we refer to them, large collections of newsreels, and then we have subsequent collections which we have collected because they're important to provide an alternative perspective to the official British films taken for the British government. The First World War film collection is actually a fraction of the size of the Second World War film collection, and that's mainly due to the fact that during the First World War there was a reluctance to have cameramen filming on the Western Front. That was for a number of reasons: security of the operations that were being undertaken by British forces, and also the security of the cameramen themselves. But during the Second World War, there was a real push to film the conflict, and that resulted in 3 designated filming units attached to the 3 main branches of the British Army, Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. So the Second World War collection is huge in comparison. We also have large collections of newsreels from both conflicts, and some of the official film that was taken by these cameramen is incorporated into these newsreels. These newsreels would have been played in cinemas at the beginning of films before the main feature would start, as it was a great way to kind of reach a mass audience very quickly and very effectively. So we also have large collections of foreign language newsreels as well, so American, French, Italian. When we get into the Second World War collections, we're also really lucky to have some German, Japanese and Russian newsreels as well. And again, this is all about feeding back into IWM's kind of main purpose, which is to explore the causes, course and consequences of conflict and its impact on people's lives. So the more perspectives we have in our collection, the easier it is for us to achieve our goals. Excuse me. And then the supplementary collections. So we have a large collection of amateur films, films from the British Transport Police, films from the London Fire Brigade. Those films mainly focus on the kind of the Blitz during the Second World War in London and its impact on kind of civilian life. So again, it's really important for us to have those. But I also just want to mention some of the practicalities about filming these conflicts. A lot of our users are often confused about why there's no colour film, for example, or why there's no sound. So I've got an example here of a First World War camera and a Second World War camera. So starting off with the First World War camera, this is a Moyen Basti camera, and as you can see from the image, it's quite large, it's quite heavy, and it requires a tripod to be able to use it. It's a hand cranked camera, which means that every cameraman would shoot their film at a slightly different speed depending on how quickly they would turn the camera. It also means that a lot of the First World War films include a lot of panning shots across landscapes or close-ups of kind of soldiers or kind of individual objects, items, because of the nature of how they would have to film using the camera and the tripod. The cameraman did not have access to colour film stock, and the ability to shoot combined image and sound wasn't created until the late 1920s. So all of our First World War film is shot mute. And then we have a Second World War camera, and this is a de Frey camera. And as you can see, it's much smaller. It can be handheld, although it can be mounted on a tripod as well. But it is also a hand cranked camera. The British Army had limited access to colour film stock. So again, the vast majority of our Second World War collection is filmed black and white. And the same for sound. Combined image and film stock was expensive and not very easy to come by in the middle of a war. So again, it's all shot mute. The other thing to bear in mind with the Second World War cameramen especially was that they were soldiers first and cameramen second, which means not only did they have to carry all of the kit that they would need to be able to film, so their camera, their tripod, spare rolls of film, but they also had to carry all of their standard army kit. So a special helmet, which didn't have a rim on the front, which would allow them to use the viewfinder on their camera, their rifle, their revolver. So they had to carry a huge amount of stuff with them as well, but they were obviously much more mobile than the First World War cameramen. So we do see a much wider range of kind of types and styles of filmmaking. So then moving on to our Cold War section, I'm just going to play you a little clip here. There's no sound, don't worry, you're not missing out on anything, of our NATO collection. This was a show reel we put together when we were doing some promotional work, because it's, oh, I've done it again and I don't know what I've done. So sorry, there we go. The Cold War collection mainly focuses from the 1950s to the 1990s, and a large part of that collection is made up of our NATO collection, which we're really lucky to have. It's a huge collection covering the entire time period from kind of the rebuilding of post-war Europe through to the fall of the Berlin Wall and kind of what we would consider to be the end of the Cold War. We also have footage from the Gulf War, Korean War, and the Falklands, but we don't have the official films that we do have for the First and the Second World War, so it's a very different collection. And as such, we really rely on what we would consider to be amateur films. So soldiers who were stationed in these conflicts, who would go out and they would use their own cameras to record the conflict and what life was like to be stationed out in these particular areas. So the NATO collection is really great for us, that it kind of encompasses that entire time period. It's probably also one of the most interesting collections to me that we have in the collection. It showcases a really wide range of filmmaking styles. There's documentaries, there's some dramas, there are some kind of exercise films, informational film type films, lots of different types of filming styles. I've come across kind of 4-way cut screens, some really interesting 90s kind of techno music overlaid in places. Like, it's just a really fascinating collection, so we're really lucky to have that as well. And then our final time period covers the contemporary conflict collection. So this time period covers kind of anything post 9/11, so 2001 to the present day. And our main conflicts that we cover are Afghanistan, Iraq, any counter-ISIS operations, and Libya. We have 3 main methods of collecting for the contemporary collections. The official transfers that we have from the MOD, so these are large collections of film and photographs taken by designated cameramen and women who are out in these conflict areas. We have private donations from people who come directly to the museum, and then we as a museum will also identify people that we would like to interview, and we will then arrange those in-house interviews as well. which kind of leads nicely on to our kind of collecting strategies. So although we are still collecting around the First and Second World Wars, the museum has a really strict remit about what we can and can't collect, and it has to fall into kind of the aim of the museum, so to discuss the causes, course and consequences of conflict and its impact on people's lives. We want to raise questions around globalization, popular culture, and politics, social change in its relation to conflicts. And we really want to create meaningful collections covering lots of different perspectives and voices. So we are more focused on collecting around our Cold War and our contemporary collections. And for contemporary, we do that in 3 ways, so short, medium and long term. In the short term, we work directly with those UK forces that are deployed to those specific conflicts to record their experiences. In the mid-term, we would want to talk to partners like NGOs, first responders, and record their experiences of what it was like to work in those conflict areas. And then in the long term, we recognise that quite a lot of the stories that we would like to tell just cannot be told until years after the event. And that's for lots of different reasons, mainly security. So we spend a lot of time identifying people we would like to talk to in the future, and then hope that at some point we will be able to carry out those interviews. We also have a lot of challenges when we're looking at these conflicts. They can be incredibly volatile, multifaceted, and things are constantly changing. Sometimes these conflict zones can be really inaccessible, and we need to consider people's security, either if we're sending somebody in or somebody's coming out. There are new and emerging technologies all the time, social media being one of them. We've seen a real shift with things like Twitter, even now with TikTok today, kind of looking at what's going on sort of with Israel and Palestine at the moment. How people use social media to share their stories. So these are kind of constant things that we are looking at and need to take into consideration. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of our preservation projects as well. So we've run a number of large preservation projects throughout the museum's history. The biggest one by far would be the transfer of nitrate film stock onto safety stock. So for anyone who's not aware, nitrate films are highly flammable. And it was decided sometime in the 1950s, I think, that we would no longer print onto nitrate film. And the museum spent a lot of time and a lot of money making safety copies onto acetate and polyester film stock. For a number of years, the museum had actually built its own specialised nitrate film storage units, but in recent years it was becoming clear that they were no longer kind of fit for purpose. So the museum actually now stores all of its nitrate film at a brand new facility built by the British Film Institute at a place called Gaydon. So again, that was part of that kind of preservation project, was making sure that what nitrate film we do have is going to be looked after well kind of for the future. In terms of the rest of our film collections, obviously digitisation has become the main way to preserve films stored on film stock. So a number of years ago, we invested in our 2K Vario scanner. That came off the back of the European funded project called Unlocking Film Heritage, where we scanned all of our First World War films to 2K. And then in the last couple of years, we've also invested in our Spinner V and our 4K scanner, so that we can now work with 4K film. And the 4K scanner is great because it's got multi-gauge capacity, and our collection contains pretty much every sort of film stock. I think the only size we don't have is 70mm, but we've got everything through from 8 to 35. So it's great that we're able to digitize our entire collections. And then finally, our tape collections. So several years ago, Sony put out an announcement to say that it would no longer be making the parts required for playback machines to work, which is a big problem when you have a large collection of tapes. So we embarked on a 4-year project to digitize our entire tape collection. So that's everything from VHSs to U-matics, mini DVs, digibeaters. They all need to be digitized. So yeah, I think we're about a year, 18 months off the end of that being completed. but that's very exciting as well, because that'll be another collection that will be kind of safe for future use. We also need to talk a little bit about digital preservation. Now, I'm aware the quality of this image is not great, and I'm really sorry about that, but it was just to give you more of a sense of the number of different digital file formats that we as an organisation have to deal with, and then how we assess them for their life expectancy and whether they're suitable for us to use as kind of preservation master copies in the future. So as you can see, that's this particular bit of the image just looks at the audiovisual files. I think this document is about 4 or 5 pages long, looking at sound files, image files. So yeah, we get a huge range that we need to consider. Ultimately, what we're looking for with digital preservation is we would really like the raw, uncompressed master files. We really don't want any kind of editing to have occurred or any compression. When we're looking to create kind of digital masters, what we want from people are the raw master files. So we prefer .mxf files, but to a certain extent, we'll take what we can get if that's if the contents of the film is something that we are really interested in keeping. Then, if it's not on the ideal format, then we'll make some concessions. Once we've then got our master file, we then create accessible copies, which we can make available for people to research on our website or by visiting the museum. Restoration projects. We have done a number of these over the years. These 3 on the screen are a couple of examples. So the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of the Yonne and the Advance of the Tanks, these are 2 First World War films that will have been played across Britain during the First World War in cinemas, so that people could see kind of, what their boys were fighting for during the war. So we spent a lot of time piecing together the relevant reels, creating new soundtracks, and scanning those reels to 4K so that we could create the restored versions. The German concentration camps factual survey film is slightly different. It was an unfinished film from the Second World War, which was looking at the liberation of concentration camps across Germany and Eastern Europe. At the time, the film was designed to kind of educate the German public on what had happened at the concentration camps. But the film took a number of years to complete, and by the time it was almost finished, the mood had changed slightly. The Cold War was about to begin, or had kind of already begun, and the mood had changed from wanting to kind of educate the German people to actually getting them on side and kind of focusing on the rebuilding in the future. So the film was transferred to the museum, I think sometime in the 1960s, and it wasn't until the kind of early 2000s that we decided to kind of start that restoration process. So that involved kind of looking at the original script, piecing together the final reel that had not been completed. So that was a huge work, a really big team of people from the museum and kind of other specialists in the area to put that together. So we are currently working on a restoration project for our 3rd big battle film from the First World War, which is called The Battle of Arras. And we've actually did some work with the Portuguese Cinemateca. We put a call out through FIAF, which is the kind of International Federation of Film Archives. We put a call out for reels of Battle of Arras, and the Portuguese Cinemateca had 4 colour tinted reels, which they very graciously shared with us, which was a real help in the restoration process. And we actually identified several shots which we didn't have in our versions. So that's a really exciting project. Hopefully that will be done in the next sort of year or 2 years. So yeah, so those are some of our restoration projects. And then the last bit I want to talk about, if I've got enough time, I've not been keeping track, so do shout at me if I'm running over, but is access. So the museum has a designated licensing team to help people research and then access our collections for kind of TV and feature films. So up on the screen are a couple of examples of feature films that we've licensed footage to over the last few years. We have a number of terms and conditions, which we do make everybody sign before they agree to, before we allow them to access our collections. It's a very long document, but the most important part of the terms and conditions are that the use of the archive will not trivialize, sensationalize, or demean the subject matter. As we kind of already discussed, the museum's collection is made up of conflicts. We have footage of concentration camps, executions, prisoners of war, and our more contemporary collections deal with people who are still very much alive today, and we need to factor that in when people want to use the collections. We also have policies around colorization. The main point from that document being that the production company has to make the viewer aware that they are not viewing the original, that they have created the colorization effectively. And we also have terms of use around marketing and advertising campaigns. And again, that just comes back to the nature of our collection and us wanting to make sure that the footage will be used in an appropriate way. But all of those requests are dealt with on a case-by-case basis and by a designated team of licensing staff. And then just very quickly, I'm hoping, will it work? No. Oh no, maybe. I just wanted to show you our designated film website, which we encourage researchers to use when they are looking at our collection. So this website is free to use. There is some additional functionality. If you would like to use that, then you do need to agree to some terms and conditions. But there's a main search bar on the page, and I just wanted to do a very basic search looking at whether we have any films relating to Portugal or to Portuguese soldiers in our collection. So hopefully this will work. As you can see, we've got 47 results that have come up, and I'm just going to click on this one here. And when you click onto each individual record, there'll be a full catalogue description, there'll be the unique IWM catalogue number, there'll be information about the date it was taken, if there are any key personalities that have been identified, and then like physical characteristics about the reel, so it's black and white, it's silent, the subtitle language is in English. There is the option to search within the metadata, so if you're looking for a specific key term, it will highlight that for you in the text. There's the option to use our clipping tool. So if you're only interested in the first, I don't know, 5-6 minutes of this film, you can then clip that out and save them to your own personal collections, which this is where you will then need to create an account. As you can see, I've got a number of collections already on the go. These collections can be shared with other people who have a registered account on the film site. So if you're a researcher working on a TV production, you can share what you found amongst each other. All of you can add clips to the same collection. And it's a really useful tool when it comes to people identifying what they would like to use for TV shows, so that we can then provide them with high resolution clips. But yeah, I'm probably way over time. If I am, I do apologise. So I'll leave it there. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Anna.
Sorry. Yes, you are right. I am speaking again. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was a very interesting presentation. And now we are going to have the presentation of Ashley. Please, Ashley, when you wish.
So, can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. So, hello. Many thanks to the university for inviting me to participate in this symposium. I'm going to talk to you all about the Museum of Modern Art's Department of Film and how we approach acquiring, preserving, and making our moving image collection accessible. These issues are heavily interrelated. We truly do function as a library and an archive. And of course, those are within the context of an art museum. So I may jump around a little bit, but hopefully you all will find this engaging and informative. So MoMA's Department of Film was officially founded in 1935, although plans for a film collection were included in the museum's incorporating documents in 1929, and our first public exhibition of films occurred in the fall of 1934. We were established as the film library, as you'll see on the can here, with the ethos that films are not only art, but they are meant to be seen. Here are two covers of our early film bulletins, which were a combination of a report on the film library's activities, as well as a rental catalog. So literally the first sentence here says it all. The film library is an educational institution which exists for the purpose of collecting and preserving representative motion pictures of all types, as well as of related material with the object of making them available for study. So from the very beginning, we were organizing public exhibitions of films, first in private screening rooms, including some at the Grand Central Palace, seen here, at colleges such as Haverford College in Pennsylvania, at the Dalton School in New York, many at the American Museum of Natural History, and even a special screening at Pickfair, the legendary estate of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks in Hollywood, California. Then from 1939 onward, screenings were on site at the main museum complex on 53rd Street after the construction of our cinema. And this is a view of the Roy and Nayuda Titus Theater, our primary 400-seat theater, still in use today. The Department of Film's current chief curator, Rajendra Roy, loves to say that the cinema is our gallery, and I couldn't agree with him more. Some of the library's first exhibitions included the motion picture, 1914 to 1934, a short survey of the film in America, 1895 to 1932, the development of narrative, a program of documentary films, and the film in Germany and in France. And you have to remember that this is the United States in the 1930s and 40s. There were no streaming services, no home video, no film schools or degrees, really. The field of cinema studies was just getting started, and the first PhD in cinema studies in the United States was not awarded until 1973. So on the subject of film studies, here are some shots of Iris Berry's film course materials taught at Columbia University. Iris Berry was MoMA's first film librarian. Later, her title was changed to curator. And I'm not trying to say here that Iris Berry invented cinema studies. She was certainly not the only one putting forth the idea that films were worthy of study. But Berry and MoMA did a huge amount of work to usher in the notion that film was an art form, and one that was on par with traditional fine arts like painting, sculpture, drawings, and photography. And not only were there no film schools in the same way that we know them today, there were also very few repertory theaters, and the ones that did exist were only in big cities like New York and Chicago. The major Hollywood studios, such as Paramount and Warner Brothers, did not think there was any sort of aftermarket for the movies they produced. It was basically only major blockbusters like Gone with the Wind that got re-releases. So if you missed a film in its initial run, it was exceptionally difficult to see it again. And if you loved movies, but you lived in a small town where the nearest movie theater was a 2-hour bus ride away, you probably were not going to the movies very often and were constantly hoping a roadshow would roll into town. So there was a real market for the budding cinema clubs and film societies who wanted to be able to see Chaplin and Keaton comedies from the teens that just weren't around anymore, and for cinephiles who wanted to see quote unquote old movies. So on the one hand, MoMA was screening films, but we were also building programs of films with the explicit intention of circulating them. We assembled compilation reels combining excerpts of multiple films that our staff thought best demonstrated particular topics, and some full films were made available just as they were. Many of these programs are still available today. This is a description of great actresses of the past. And the exact same compilation that Berry put together in 1938 is now streaming on MoMA's YouTube channel. You can see it exactly as it was assembled in the 1930s. That said, the idea that one could rent art was not unique to the film library. You could also rent paintings from MoMA during this time period, which is a fun fact, I think. Here, you could go down to the painting library, pull one out, take it home with you. We still do have a rental branch, now known as the Circulating Film and Video Library, also known as CIRC. We still very much believe that film should be seen and studied really by anyone who has the interest. CIRC is primarily a 16 millimeter operation, mostly serving small film festivals and professors at colleges and universities who want to screen Andy Warhol and Maya Deren films in their film history courses. So just a little recap. So far, we've covered theatrical exhibition, circulating programs, and building upon that library foundation. Nowadays, we do archival loans as well, which can be for major film festivals like Venice or Bologna, for fellow film archives, for other museums who want to screen moving images in gallery spaces. Loans are more formal than rentals from CIRC. Helen mentioned FIAF. MoMA is a founding member of FIAF, the International Federation of Film Archives. So we abide by FIAF regulations for loans. Borrowers have to submit an application and a venue report describing the condition of the equipment and handling procedures. We do not allow plattering of film prints. If you want to borrow a 35 millimeter print from MoMA, you have to have a changeover system, meaning 2 projectors side by side, so you cannot splice all 11,000 feet of the film together into an enormous platter like they do at multiplexes. Theatrical exhibition, circulating programs, archival loans, and the last point of access I'm going to talk about is the Film Study Center. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, access to the film collection is fundamental to the department's mission and has been since our founding. The film library facilitated research by and benefited from scholarly contributions from some of the original film historians, including Jay Lida, Paul Rotha, Charlie Turner, Kevin Brownlow, Paul Spear. Siegfried Krakauer even wrote the Film 101 classic From Caligari to Hitler using film library resources. So as a natural extension of those early scholarly residencies, then director Willard Van Dyke formally established the Film Study Center in 1968. It was also during this time in 1966 that the Film Library became the Department of Film. Previously, the Film Library had been its own separate corporation affiliated with the larger museum. And in 1966, film became a true curatorial department, which it had really already been functioning as, but now had the same name as the other fine arts. And for more than 40 years, the Film Study Center was expertly supervised by Charles Silver, film screenings, he's on the left here, and Ronald Magliozzi for special collections and documentation, along with sort of a motley crew of cinephile assistants and volunteers, like Ed Carter in the center of this photo. And nowadays, this is my job. Today, the Celeste Bartos International Film Study Center is the busiest study center at the museum, hosting more than 200 appointments annually and answering hundreds more reference questions. The FSC is open to everyone, free of charge. You do not have to be a distinguished university professor or have already published 10 award-winning film books. As long as you are researching something to do with cinema, you can arrange a visit. But because film is a time-based medium and there are only so many hours in a day, we do have to have some limits. If a film is particularly easy to see, like say Casablanca, you have to have a specific reason that you need to see that movie on film at MoMA. If a researcher is writing their dissertation on mise-en-scène and the only commercially available copy of a particular film is an extremely doopy, washed out public domain DVD, but we have a pristine 35 millimeter print, okay, that's a valid reason to need to see our copy of it. Even if it's readily available, you can buy a DVD for $8 on Amazon. In addition to films, we also have extensive special collections holdings, thanks in large part to Ron Magliozzi, who I just mentioned, and to Eileen Bowser before him. We have studios' business papers, storyboards, filmmakers' diaries, stills, posters, piano rolls, sheet music, lobby cards, other ephemera, just about any film-related documentation you can think of. We have around 200 named collections, such as Stan Vanderbeek. You can see one of his drawings, plans for the movie Drome on the left here. The Charles Theater is another very large collection of papers that we have. And then several thousand either smaller or more loosely organized groups of materials, such as press books, heralds, or souvenir programs. Finding aids are a comprehensive inventory of the materials in the collection, as well as a description or history of the subject plus provenance details, how the materials came to MoMA, how our staff processed them, did they rename things, did they reorder files, do we know who those handwritten notes on this folder is from? Some of these finding aids were written on a typewriter. They might have lots of handwritten notations and are hard to read. They may be several hundred pages long. Not great if you are a researcher looking for one specific title or bit of information. So over the last year, we've been working to make many of our finding aids searchable, and we plan to post many of them on MoMA's website to further facilitate research. So on that note, because of COVID-19 right now, all curatorial study centers at MoMA are closed to the public. We are not allowed to have researchers on site in our offices. So this is part of our efforts to make our collections available remotely. We've had to get creative over the last 14 months, both in the FSC and in terms of programming in our theaters, all of which have been completely closed since last March. Because of this, we established the virtual cinema to exhibit our film series remotely for MoMA members, as well as a Vimeo channel for the Film Study Center. The vast majority of our collection has not been digitized. It is still film or videotape, so the selection is relatively small compared to what I can usually screen for researchers. But we do have about 40 titles that are available remotely for private research purposes. These are not publicly available due to copyright restrictions. So you do have to contact the Film Study Center and for research access. So how did we get all of these things that we show into our collection? Going back a little bit in time again, Iris Berry, the first film curator, and John Abbott, first director of the film library, the two of them spent a great deal of time convincing studios that they should allow MoMA to acquire their films. Many of these, although not exclusively, were major Hollywood studios, as well as independent filmmakers, foreign production companies. The film library staff met a tremendous amount of resistance. They faced studio executives who did not understand the concept of a film museum or film archive just at the most basic level. You know, they said, why would we give you film prints? They're not oil paintings. What would you even do with them? Many studios did not see the use of their films beyond their initial commercial runs in the theatrical circuits, or some did see their value, but decided that a film's physical material value took priority, that recycling film elements for their silver content was worth more and was also immediately attainable versus a film's potential, but not necessarily guaranteed re-release value. So because of this resistance, we have some gaps in our classic Hollywood holdings that I think surprise many people, particularly MGM. We have very few MGM films in our collection because in the 30s and 40s, the studio wanted to maintain their own archive and would not allow MoMA to acquire or circulate their films. So many of our core holdings are, simply stated, what Berry and Abbott could get their hands on. So I mentioned the Pickfair screening. So we have the films of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. This is Mrs. and Mr. Samuel Goldwyn. Got John Abbott, Mary Pickford, Jesse Lasky, and Harold Lloyd, and that's Iris Berry on the right there. We have basically every Biograph film ever produced that still exists. The Biograph Corporation later became the Actinograph Corporation and then was owned by the Empire Trust, and they went out of business in 1939 and called up Iris Berry and said, if you can come up to our storage facility in Harlem, take whatever you want, take it all, it's going in the trash otherwise. And so we have more than 700 Biograph negatives, we have business papers, photo catalogs and picture catalogs chronicling the entire history of this sort of foundational early production company because they were going to throw it away otherwise. We have many Thomas Edison films and scripts because his studio was located nearby in New Jersey. So I don't want to say that's you know, opportunistic collecting, but they took what they could get. They also face political and ideological barriers. Here I am talking about issues like government censorship. So this is a photo of Berry and Abbott conducting an extensive European and Russian tour in 1936. And they managed to acquire several films that the Nazis actively tried to destroy. In later decades, our curators faced similar issues, getting films out of communist China. So just managing to obtain these films, to remove them from the path of destruction or suppression, was an act of preservation. So I'll come back to this issue and talk a little more about photochemical conservation and format migration, but staying on the subject of how we obtain films, The Department of Film's acquisition history, and thus the contents of our film collection, has been almost entirely shaped by MoMA's curators. There are some films that we acquired by chance, usually as part of a bulk acquisition. So for instance, in the early 1980s, we acquired Thomas Brandon's collection of films and papers. Brandon was an independent producer and distributor who frequently worked with organizations like the Workers' Film and Photo League. So when we acquired his collection, it was films that he had distributed and his personal collection. So we obtained newsreel coverage of union strikes, industrial films to which we might not otherwise have had access. Similarly, we acquired film historian and scholar Charlie Turner's personal collection, which included many home movies and travel films, travelogues. And we've had a few spontaneous donations, you know, an eager animation enthusiast leaving a box of 16mm cartoons, Bugs Bunny cartoons outside our storage facility. But by and large, if a title is in MoMA's permanent collection, it's because one of our curators wanted it there. And each of our curators has their own areas of interest and expertise, which heavily influences the titles that they pursue for acquisition. But that doesn't mean that, you know, film as art equals only art films. We do have a lot of what, you know, you would consider art films: surrealist, Dadaist, French New Wave, experimental, avant-garde, Stan Brakhage. But those are far from the only types of films that MoMA acquires. We truly have a little bit of everything. B-movies can be art, pornography can be art, home movies can and are art. Eileen Bowser's legacy is one of collection refinement, of digging deep into our silent film holdings, researching, in many cases identifying Biograph and Edison holdings, making these films actually usable, not just a stack of unidentified negatives on the shelf. Renowned historian Donald Ritchie only worked at MoMA for about 3 years, but in that time he built a significant archive of Japanese films for our department. Because of Jutta Jensen, we have many Arab and Middle Eastern films, Brazilian films, Georgian films. We have other curators who brought early examples of video art and sound installations into the collection, curators who focused on documentaries, women filmmakers, one curator very into animation. So we have a rich and varied animation collection, more than just those random Bugs Bunny cartoons. And we have some curators who are chameleons, and their strengths are that they know a little bit about everything and have a wide net of interests. So we have a truly international scope in our collecting policies. We have every format, again, as Helen said, that you can think of, everything from regular 8mm, super 8mm, 9.5, up to 68mm Biograph mutoscopes, 70mm, not a whole lot of 70mm, but a little bit. My point here is that MoMA is not the Library of Congress, but we simply cannot take everything, even if we wanted to. But at the same time, we don't have such a hyper-focused mission statement that can sometimes make selection easier, such as a regional archive that will only collect films produced in one US state. So it's ultimately the curators who are making the tough decisions and determining, is this film worth a second look? Should it be preserved for future generations, to dissect and to study, and ultimately to appreciate? We have more than 30,000 titles in our collection these days, more than 120,000 film cans. And that brings me to preservation. As I alluded to before, in the early days of MoMA's film library, acquisition often was preservation, removing a film from harm's way, whether that was benign neglect or active destruction. By bringing it into the collection was already an act of preserving it for the future. Again, as Helen mentioned, in the 1950s, with the introduction of acetate film stock, MoMA started reprinting many of our films from nitrate onto safety. I'm sure nitrate won't wait is a familiar phrase to a few people listening. And we had a similar approach again in the 80s when polyester stock came on the scene and started migrating from safety to polyester, or again, even sometimes going back to the nitrate and going nitrate to polyester. That said, MoMA is still committed to photochemical film preservation for as long as celluloid and videotape are manufactured. We believe that movies should maintain the original form intended by the filmmaker or artist whenever possible. Here's a photo of the Celeste Bartos Film Preservation Center, which opened in 1996. It's our state-of-the-art climate-controlled storage facility in Hamlin, Pennsylvania. There is a 7,900 square foot facility for the museum's holding of nitrate films, and then a 28,000 square foot main building for acetate, polyester, videotape, and works on paper. But on the other hand, we cannot deny the benefits of digital technology. There are some restoration processes that are simply not possible photochemically, or that may be possible but would be exorbitantly expensive. This is a still from Nathaniel Dorsey's film 17 Reasons Why. He was extremely particular about the digitization of this 16mm film. He is very much a film on film artist, so he was only going to allow us to digitize this film if we could scan it to his precise specifications. And with digital software, we were able to make extremely small changes to the color to get it to look exactly the way that he wanted, changes that would have been imperceptible using photochemical techniques. And the number of color tests that we ran would have been just ridiculously and prohibitively expensive to make using film. So digital is also very important when it comes to access, which I have spent a lot of time talking about. So you know it's a topic that I care about. Digitizing a film opens up many possibilities for increased visibility, more diverse audiences, audiences that are not limited to only people who can physically travel to New York or who could pursue a rental or loan. So while the film department does very much value the theatrical experience, and we want to maintain the communal activity of sitting in the dark with a group of strangers enjoying a film together, we do acknowledge the many freedoms that come with digital. I should mention that MoMA does not have our own internal lab facilities. We work with several labs around the country and even around the world, actually depending on the needs of the work. Some labs cannot handle nitrate, some labs cannot process color, some labs specialize in small gauge formats, some labs only handle videotape. So our collections manager and film conservation officer coordinate preservation efforts with whichever lab is best for the job. And our preservation priorities are based on a combination of both need and want. So when I say wants, those are usually films that a curator would like to include in an upcoming film series, but it needs to be preserved first, so that film may be prioritized. If it's a work that is frequently requested for loan or for the study center, that can sometimes move it up the queue. We also work with several filmmakers to preserve their entire canon. So we are systematically working through all the films of Yvonne Rainer and Ernie Geer, for example. But our highest priorities are films in need, films that need to be preserved because of their physical properties, nitrate or acetate decomposition, format obsolescence for videotape. You know, there are very few 3/4 inch PAL U-matic decks in working order these days, very few technicians who know how to maintain and repair the decks that do exist, and you know, very few labs who can handle 2-inch quad anymore. So other needs could be uniqueness. If, you know, the film elements we have are perfectly stable, no color fading or other signs of decomposition, but it's the only known copy in existence. We communicate with other archives and repositories. Again, FIAF connections are very helpful here to see if they have materials, and if so, what condition are they in? If we have the best elements or the only elements, that will move a title up the list for sure. When it comes to video works, we are a little more liberal when it comes to format migration. There are some works where the physicality of the carrier is part of the artwork. You know, this must be screened on VHS on a CRT monitor because that monitor and that cassette carrier are integral to the artist's conception of the piece. But other artists are more format agnostic. You know, it's still a video signal regardless of the carrier, so they don't care if we show a work on VHS or digibeta or transfer it to a digital file. All of these decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. We do not have a hard and fast rule that applies to everything. And I'll say a little bit about Born Digital materials and our digital preservation projects. We have a dedicated a repository called the DRMC, Digital Repository for Museum Collections. And that is the purview of our media conservation department. So we have a whole team that is specialized up to date on all of the newest standards. So I won't go too into that because it's not exactly what I do, but we are very conscious of the different needs of different formats. And yes, that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Ashley. It was very interesting. Now I'm going to give the word to Alexandre, that is going to make some comments and moderate the discussion, the debate. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Ashley, for these two great presentations. I have learned a lot from you both, and I'm sure that many viewers that that we have here with us, and those who will watch your presentation in the following days should agree with me. There is no doubt that your talks help us to better understand the strategies of acquisition and conservation of film from two of the oldest film archives in the world. For decades, moving images have been seen just as an entertainment or an information product. For this reason, they were not generally used by science as a source of information, and we can say the same thing about art. However, in the last 3 decades, this situation is changing. Therefore, we should highlight the work that has been developed by many national institutions, such as the Imperial War Museum and the Museum of Modern Art, and by international organizations such as the International Federation of Film Archives, the FIAF. It's now possible for academic community, film professionals, and public to access and view films produced from the very beginnings of film technology to the present day. There is another aspect that I would like to emphasize. Indeed, cinema is close to us on a daily basis, but is not always seen as an heritage that must be preserved. Thus, explaining the work of these archives, as we have done today, along with their openness to the community, allow us to better understand the importance of their work. Thanks again, Helen and Ashley. We received several questions via Facebook chat and YouTube chat, but due to the limit time, I will read 3 of them. So the first question is to Helen. Cliff Bilal placed a question that is, you talk about innovation during the 50s and the 90s. In this context, can we say that this innovation is a result of war?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know whether it's necessarily an innovation which will have come from war. I think the evolution of those technologies and the way in which the cameramen and the photographers shot film and photographs during that time will have changed the style. Their style will have changed because of the conflicts and the way in which they would have had to kind of carried themselves when they were in those conflict areas and been, what they would have been able to shoot. But I don't know whether I would necessarily say that the war was these conflicts were the driving factor in advancing the technology as such. No, I don't think I would say that.
Thank you, Ashley. Here I have a sort of comment and question. It says, listening to you, I remember a lot about the debate surrounding the positions of Ernest Lindgren from the BFI and Henri Langlois de la Cinémathèque Française. Who do you think won this debate?
Oh, wow.
And nowadays we use a mix of the two positions, or you think definitely Lindgren was on the right track?
I think that's right. I think it was so different back then, and they just had such a different concept of what it is that they were trying to build. It's really tough to pick just one, but I think I do have to go with Lindgren.
Okay.
I mean, Henri Langlois buried films in the ground because he didn't want to lose them. He was so paranoid. I mean, you can't do that.
Yeah, some defend that Lindgren is more like egocentric. It's my collection, and Langlois, and Lindgren was occupied building an archive. I have a question here that I think both of you can answer. That is, back in the days, like in the 80s, when you migrate images, moving images from a support to another support, what happened to the old support? Do you still store them, or it was destroyed in some cases?
MoMA does, for the most part, if it's strictly a format migration. Sometimes it is, we are making that step due to deterioration. So if it's the nitrate negative is just about to disintegrate, we get it off of that format, and then we have to deaccession it and dispose of it because it's completely disintegrated. But if it's strictly for carrier migration, then we keep the original.
Yeah, very, very much the same. We'll only ever really get rid of elements if we have kind of identical duplicate copies. We'll get rid of the duplicates. We'll always retain one master format, whether that be a tape or a film reel. We would only ever dispose if the film reel was kind of past the point of saving. Yeah, if the deterioration was so bad that we would just have to dispose of it for the safety of the rest of the collection.
Okay, I have another comment. Sarah says that actually the debate surrounding Landgreen and Langlois is now in the moment of a revival, saying that some people defend that films should not be restored because by that way you are offering a different kind of film to the viewer. But others more close to the old Landgreen theory say that that's the best way to preserve the master copies. What is your opinion on that?
So as I was talking about some of the restoration projects that we've undertaken, from my experience of kind of a knowledge of those restoration projects, the museum will always keep the original reels that we have. They will always be our master reels, but the restoration projects are, yeah, I would say they were a way of reinterpreting those films to a new audience. That's why we've added things like a new soundtrack to the Battle of the Somme film. But we also created a version with a soundtrack that would have been played in the cinemas at the time. So, you know, it's about giving audiences today a kind of a glimpse of what it would have been like to have seen that film 100 years ago, but also what it would look like today if we have the technologies available to us today. That's kind of how we at IWM approach our restoration projects. As far as the wider debate goes, I don't know which side of the fence I would fall down on. I think it would depend on the nature of the film, but Ashley, what do you think?
At MoMA, we try to stay as true to the original as possible. So sometimes you'll see, you know, a Blu-ray release of a Technicolor film and the colors look like jelly beans, and it's just, that is not what it looked like in the original release. And our conservation officer goes to great efforts to find a vintage print whenever possible, to recreate, you know, the lamp that was in the projector, because that affects things like color and contrast, and to get it as close as to the original as possible. I do think, being in a museum context, we can provide a lot of contextual information when we do screenings as well. So if it is something with a new soundtrack that is an updated, you know, this is the 2021 soundtrack, it's gonna sound like pop or metal or whatever, you know, we will say that to the audience so that they know that this is our interpretation of, this is not how it originally would have been seen. But I don't know, I always fall down on the side of access. I would rather to be able to see a film than to just read about it. So I do have to fall down on the, let's make copies, let's preserve these films for the future.
Okay, last question. Film as a source of information for science. Only in the last decades, as we can say that people view cinema as a source of information. Do you feel in MoMA and in the Imperial War Museum that more people are approaching you to use films as a source of information for science, like for, I say, history, architecture, military science? Do you feel a difference, or do you feel that people address MoMA and the Imperial War Museum to study films on their field of research of film studies?
I definitely think that people are turning more to films for historical reasons, to learn about the history of not only factual events, but also social mores and fashion, and the way that things like architecture changed over the years, because we have documentary and newsreel films of sites that no longer exist, buildings that no longer exist, and they're a wonderful resource for these sort of factual pursuits. Yeah, but I mean, I also think that film started as a scientific endeavor. There were these early photography experiments and Méliès and the horses running and trying to see if do all four hoofs ever leave the ground at once. So there's definitely been a revival, as you said, Alexander, but I don't think it's new.
Yeah, similarly, the museum has been licensing film, I think, since the 1950s, and we've had people come to us for lots of different types of productions, not just kind of your standard history of the First or the Second World War, but yeah, looking at kind of architecture and fashion. We do have some films in the collection which relate to kind of advances in military science. We've got an entire collection relating to the effects of atomic weapons testing. So those have always kind of been a good example when people are looking for kind of military advancements in kind of science and technology. But what we kind of pride ourselves on as a museum, or kind of from the licensing team in particular, is that it's the added kind of information and metadata that we can provide over something like a stock shop kind of library. A lot of the footage from the First and the Second World Wars, which make up the bulk of our collection, is readily accessible from multiple different sources. But if you want to tell a very detailed story, then coming to the museum is your best bet. We can provide you with that kind of extra layer of detail. So I always found it one of the most fascinating parts of my job when I was working in the licensing team, was to kind of see the range of topics that people would come to us for, and not just for TV and feature film, but I did a lot of work with museums and other cultural heritage organisations across the world. I did some work with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which was doing an exhibition on different types of building material, and I supplied them some footage of a First World War aircraft that was made out of a particular type of wood, and they weren't interested in the war footage, they were interested in the material that the aircraft was made out of. So yeah, I think it has always been there, but it's really refreshing to see people using our collections in the kind of the untraditional sense, and not just for a history documentary.
Yes, I have the exact same experience in the Film Study Center. I can have 10 researchers come and watch the exact same film, and every single one of them has a different perspective. They're watching it for a different reason. They come to a different conclusion, and it really is just fascinating to see how people have such different interpretations or different reasons to watch a film. And it's the exact same film.
Thank you. I think.
Thank you very much, Ashley and Helen. Yes, I agree with you. In the other day, I was speaking with someone that uses film to study to do medical studies, old footage, to see how people operate, how how doctors operate and things like that. And so it's incredible. So due to time limit, we will finish for today. Thank you very much. It was two great presentations. I think in the following days we'll receive more questions via email, and some of them we'll make a mix and we can send it to you. Also, the comments that will arrive to us.
Okay, thank you, both of you. It was really very interesting. It was a good opportunity to have the opportunity to listen to you. So I hope you can have another opportunity. So thank you a lot once again, and bye.